Chapter 9, Mind Washing and Brain Programming. We have certain preconceived notions about location and space which have come down to us from ape-like ancestors. Sir Arthur Eddington. Space, Time, and Gravitation. The greatest utopian possibility before us is also the greatest dystopian terror. We are learning more and more about the pragmatics of brain change, how to alter anybody's brain so as to set them in a totally new reality. Visions of 1984 and Brave New World lurk in this very concept. But we are also learning how to change our own brains, learning to use them for fun and profit rather than for misery and robothood. Visions of superhumanity are implicit in any perception of what this means. The brain can be tuned, like a TV, to turn off any channel and to bring in a new channel. This is what the veterans of the 1960s, 1970s neurological revolution know. This is the major threat and the major promise of our time. Consider the alternatives. Cyanide and synchronicity. In November 1978, I was in Seattle to see the 10-hour play which Ken Campbell had made out of the 3 Illuminatus novels by Bob Shea and myself. In the course of the drama came a scene Shea and I had almost forgotten writing in the 7 years since the books were finished in 1971. The scene concerned a lunatic messiah who orders 3,300 of his robot disciples to commit suicide by drinking cyanide. The mindless automatons obey and each drinks a cyanide cocktail. Shea and I had written that bizarre sequence to illustrate the extremes to which brainwashing can go. We both regarded it as an extravagant fantasy for satirical purposes, an exaggeration of our serious theme. Yet while the actors on the stage were depicting this fantasy, every TV and newspaper in the land was discussing the exact same species of mass zombie behavior. Our fictional maniac guru was Adolf Hitler. In November 1978, while our play was being performed, another maniac guru, Jim Jones, had played the whole sequence out in reality. In Guyana, he had ordered 900 of his robots to drink cyanide, and they had all obeyed. It was particularly interesting to me that Jones had staged this Gotterdammerung while our play was having its American premiere. It was even more interesting that the tool of mass suicide in our fiction and in Jones' reality had been cyanide. Carl Jung, the psychologist, and Wolfgang Pauli, the physicist, had a name for peculiar coincidences of that order of evenness. They called them synchronicities and said they represented a causal and or holistic principle in nature that acts outside the linear past-present feature of Newtonian time. Pauli, like most quantum physicists, was aware that subatomic events cannot be understood in Newtonian terms and must require some sort of a causality, indeterminism, or a holism, superdeterminism, to explain them. In either case, the distinction between observer and observed breaks down. About that, more later. Jung, in turn, had observed that such synchronicities, weird coincidences, tend to occur when certain deep structures in the psyche are activated. He assumed that these structures were at what he called the psychoid level, below the collective unconscious, where mind and matter are not yet distinct, the quantum foam out of which matter and form and consciousness hierarchically emerge. Wait, it gets weirder. Arrest to bank robber. When petty years, was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army on February the 4th, 1974. She was a normal young heiress. She was attending a normal college, had a normal live-in boyfriend, and smoked a normal amount of weed for a young heiress of that time. 57 days later, she had become a new person with a new name, Tanya, and was living in a new reality tunnel. Where Petty had been heterosexual, Tanya was bisexual. Where Petty largely accepted the year's family tunnel reality with only a few liberal modifications typical of her age group, Tanya was a violent and fanatic revolutionary. Where Petty had been respectful to her parents, Tanya denounced them as corporate liars and castigated them as being involved in a capitalist plot to murder the poor people of the U.S. down to the last man, woman, and child. Where Petty had been nice and polite and certainly nonviolent, Tanya had her photo taken holding a Tommy gun and assisted in at least one bank robbery and perhaps other felonies. What had happened? When Petty Tanya was captured and brought to trial, the defense claimed that she had been brainwashed. The jury either did not understand or did not believe this. They sentenced Petty to prison for the crimes Tanya had committed. Debate about this case continues to the present, since some people think Miss Sears was responsible for the consciousness change she underwent while held captive by the SLA, and others are just as sure she was not responsible. Leaving metaphysical questions of responsibility aside for a moment, it seems obvious that a young lady of her class and background would almost certainly not have taken up bank robbing if she had not first been kidnapped and incorporated by the SLA. Since the SLA called itself an army, let us compare it to an army. This may prove illuminating. One does not get kidnapped into an army the way Hearst got kidnapped into the SLA, but the process is not entirely dissimilar. U.S. Army recruiters do not break into a young man's house in the middle of the night with guns, as the SLA did with Petty. They simply sent the young man a notice in the mail. Nonetheless, coercion is there. The young draftee knows that if he ignores the letter, government agents will be around to seize his body in a short while unless he flees the country. He will then either go into the army or into jail. Thus, whether we are speaking about the SL Army or the U.S. Army, the subject is reduced to infantile helplessness. Other people are deciding what is to be done to his or her body. One is pushed to the neonate position of being 1 foot high in a 6 foot tall world, as it were. Like the small child, one is learning that the first rule of survival is to obey. Most people, except nudists, are shy about appearing naked in public, and this is the most common of all nightmares. There I was with no clothes on. Joyce made this the central incident in the dream that is all dreams Finnegan's Wake. The first step in leaving the civilian reality tunnel and being initiated into the army reality tunnel is thus the physical examination, in which the subject is stripped naked and made to march around a large building with other naked victims while the fully clothed army personnel give the briefest possible orders. Stand up, sit down, go there, come back here, etc. The Masonic initiation, which only removes part of the clothing of the subject, is a milder version of the stripping away of previously secure social parameters. What is really being stripped away is more subtle. It is the whole social system in which one has lived before being snatched by a US or an SL army. When the doctor tells the naked draftee, bend over, spread your cheeks, so-called normal reality has ended as totally as if the victim had been incorporated into a surrealist movie. If an employer becomes too obnoxious, one can always find a new job. You cannot walk out on the US or SL Army that way because acute First Circuit helplessness is being imprinted. When the Russian mathematician Ouspensky was first studying with Gurdjieff, he had great trouble understanding Gurdjieff's insistence that most people are machines and totally unaware of the objective world around them. Then, one day after World War I had begun, Ouspensky saw a truck full of artificial legs. These artificial legs were being sent to the frontline hospitals for soldiers whose legs had not even been blown off yet, but whose legs would be blown off. The prediction that these legs would be blown off was so certain that the artificial legs were already on their way to replace the natural legs. The prediction was based on the mathematical certainty that millions of young men would march to the front to be maimed and murdered as mindlessly as cattle marching into a slaughterhouse. In a flash, Ouspensky understood the mechanical nature of ordinary human consciousness. I can't get out. My horns won't fit through the door. Initiation into the Manson family is not dissimilar. Lynette Fromm was much like Patty Hearst, a normal American young woman with less money than hers, but no special proclivity for criminal behavior. After passing through General Manson's basic training, Lynette had become squeaky Fromm and was convicted for pointing a gun at the US president with seeming intent to assassinate him. In the next chapter, we will explain further how being captured, drafted by an army is the model of all brainwashing experience. Human society as a whole is a vast brainwashing machine whose semantic rules and sex roles create a social robot. The concept of washing is, of course, unscientific and crude. The brain is not a dirty garment, but an electrocolloidal information processor, a living network of over 110 billion nerve cells capable of interconnections, a number higher than the total of all the atoms in the universe. In this elegant, micro-miniaturized biocomputer, more than 100 million processes are programmed every minute. From the viewpoint of neurosociology, how I perceive myself and my world depends on how each circuit has been wired in my brain. Society has always been known how to wire children. The process is called acculturalization. It explains why children of Catholics tend to become Catholics, children of Samoans fit into Samoan society, children of communists become good little communists, etc. Each generation brainwashes the next. Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam, between them, are the most potent brain programming institutions on this planet. Approximately half the art and philosophy of the human race, the architecture, the music, the paintings, the literature, the educational ideals, the great ideas, has been influenced by and or nurtured by these three great systems of theology. This is not to denigrate the contributions of Confucianism, Judaism, Hinduism, modern science, etc., but merely to emphasize the extent to which the higher civilizations have been shaped by the four creators of these three omni-religions, Buddha, Muhammad, Jesus, and St. Paul. What did these four men have in common? As Aleister Crowley points out, no point of doctrine, no point of ethics, no theory of a hereafter they share, and yet in the history of their lives we find one identity amid many diversities. Buddha was an ordinary Hindu nobleman, and then he experienced a rapid brain change, after which he became a great teacher. Muhammad was a humble camel driver with no sign of exceptional intelligence or ambition, and then he experienced a rapid brain change, after which he became teacher, conqueror, lawmaker, and prophet. We hear nothing of Jesus, save a few fables, until the age of 30, when he experiences a rapid brain change and puts forth a doctrine that is to overturn the Roman Empire and influence Western civilization until the present. St. Paul, who took the teaching of Jesus and turned it into a militant movement, suffered an extreme form of brain change, of which he tells us that he was temporarily struck blind and lifted up into the heavens, where he beheld things of which it is not lawful to speak. On all else but the experience of illumination, they disagree. Buddha insisted that his enlightenment was perfect and natural. Are you a god? He was once asked. No. Are you a saint? No. Then what are you? I am awake. Muhammad informs us that he spoke to the angel Gabriel, Jesus that the Father which is in heaven spoke through him, and St. Paul that he saw the lights and wonders above mentioned. Making every possible reservation about fable and myth, we get this one coincidence. And nobody experiences rapid brain change, consciousness dilation, and abruptly becomes very much a hysterical somebody. Much of the human race is still living on the legacy of these four bioelectrical illuminations for good and for ill. Most people, the present author included, would consider what happened to Pettyhurst bad and what happened to Buddha good. It needs to be emphasized that both the bad and the good brain change experiences are functionally the same. The process is modeled on a small scale by any design such as the following. If you have seen this on the one way, look at it again. There are two opposite ways of seeing it. When your whole world, not just a design on a book page, is transformed this way, you are experiencing the kind of brain change that can turn a rich heiress into a bank robber, an obscure carpenter into a messiah, or an ordinary bank teller into a mental patient. Similar forms of major brain change underlie all revolutionary breakthroughs in the arts and in science as well. Neurosociology is a history of massive brain changes, as we quantum jumped from tribal reality to fatal reality, from fatal reality to industrial reality, and now are jumping to future reality. Consider the revolution against death if you think you haven't been brainwashed. Not all people have accepted mortality. Mystics, of course, have always insisted there is a species of spiritual immortality, but aside from that, Taoists in China and alchemists in Europe spent hundreds of years seeking the elixir of life that would allow for physical immortality. Paracelsus, for instance, left behind some of his sperm with directions to a student on how to revive or recreate him out of it. He seems to have had a crude and inaccurate idea of cloning. In the 1780s, both Benjamin Franklin and Condorcet in American France wrote that medical science would eventually conquer death along with every other disease. The modern immortalist movement began with physicist R.C.W. Ettinger, who published The Prospect of Immortality in 1964. Ettinger, who had entered a reality tunnel different from the imprinted consensus reality of our tribe, said bluntly that we could be the generation that abolished death, and we should start working for that goal. Since then, research on life extension and longevity has quantum jumped rapidly. Numerous books have come forth carrying the same basic message as Ettinger's. Among them have been The Biological Time Bomb, Taylor, 1968, The Immortalist, Harrington, 1969, The Immortality Factor, Segerberg, 1973, Here Comes Immortality, Cecile, 1974, Pro-Longevity, Rosenfeld, 1976, No More Dying, Kurtzman, 1978, The Life Extension Revolution, Kent, 1980. Dozens of societies have been founded for anti-aging research to lobby for more research or just to publicize the possibility before us, the enormous evolutionary jump from mortality to immortality. Among these groups are Committee for the Elimination of Death, San Marcos, CA, Bay Area Cryonic Society, San Francisco, CA, Prometheus Society, Baltimore, and the Long Life Chicago, Illinois, Alcor Foundation, San Diego, CA, Foundation for Research Against Disease and Death, New York, NY, etc. Now consider the cover of a recent book on this topic. Conquest of Death, Alvin Silverstein, PhD. The front jacket says in bold type but timid words, a controversial look at the revolution in medicine and why we may be the last generation to die. Note the pessimistic implications. Immortality is coming, but not for me and you. We are still condemned to death. Our horns won't fit through the door. This fatalistic version of Dr. Silverstein's message must have seemed necessary to the publishers because they felt that saying we don't have to die would be too shocking to the ordinary reader. What? You and I live forever? Nonsense. Our reality tunnels have all been imprinted to end with the dying of the light. Inside the jacket, a more accurate version of what Dr. Silverstein is saying appears. We need not be the last generation to die. We can conquer death in our time. Evidently, putting this on the front of the book would have been too much of a neurological revolution for the average reader, at least in the publisher's estimation. One has to reach page 189 of the book to find Dr. Silverstein's own estimate of the probable chronology of immortality, which is good news, folks. 1983, we begin to halt the aging process. 1989, lifespan prolonged indefinitely. 1999, conquest of disease and death. Well, he was over-optimistic, but we've definitely reached the first step, 1997. Who told you that you had to die? Were they any more infallible than the people who programmed Prometheus, etc.? But the immortalists are only a minority. So were the Einsteinians in 1910. But Reverend Jones told me to drink the cyanide and he knows what's right.